And the winner of this month's Patreon poll is The Doors. A huge thank you to all my patrons for voting this time around, and let's just get right into it. The face of The Doors is obviously lead singer Jim Morrison, who's kind of a conflicting figure in the world of rock and roll. People either consider him a brilliant poet who pushed the boundaries in how we perceive rock music, or
he's a drunken buffoon, posing as a poet.
I like The Doors.
This probably isn't aided by the movie The Doors, which really obsesses over the excess of his lifestyle and personality, though I'm not a fan of most of these biopics to begin with. A lot of people tell me I look like Val Kilmer playing Jim Morrison, but I don't see the resemblance. I think because of Jim Morrison's stardom, not to mention him becoming a member of the 27 Club, the rest of the band doesn't get their due credit. John Densmore's explosive drum fills really bring an intensity to their music. Robbie Krieger's fingerstyle guitar playing is very unique, and he penned a lot of their best-known songs. Ray Manzarek has to go down as one of rock and roll's greatest keyboard players. When I think of the 60s organ sound, I think of Ray. Not to mention the fact that he covered the bass parts with his left hand.
No bass? That's right. The Gypsies had no homes, the Doors had no bass.
Well, actually, they did use several bass players on almost all their studio recordings. Most notably Doug Luban, who was even offered to become their 5th member at one point, but declined to focus on his own band. Like Black Sabbath, some of their songs are pretty long, and since we're formatting this like a vinyl record, we'll have to jump around this list a bit and rely on the bonus tracks. The Curtis awoke before dawn. He put his boots on. He made a list of his favorite Doors songs, and he walked on down the hall. We'll start with the lead-off track from their self-titled debut album. Break On Through sounds as great today as it did half a century ago. Heavily inspired by Ray Charles' What I Say, John's bossa nova beat leads the charge, followed by Ray Manzarek's Fender Rhodes. His organ solo, played on a Vox Continental, is a standout of 60s psychedelic rock. A running theme throughout this list will be the multiple interpretations of Jim Morrison's lyrics. It's obviously a rebellious song, but what is he trying to break through to? Consciousness? Breaking up with his girlfriend? Or more likely LSD? Since I grew up with the 2000s reissue, I always heard the bridge as "She Get High," but originally the last word was edited out to maximize radio play. And they might have had a good point considering the Doors got fired from the Ed Sullivan Show for saying higher in the song Light My Fire.
Girl, we couldn't get much higher.
I talked about this in the History of Rock 60s vid, a pretty famous story where they told Jim to change the line from "Girl, we couldn't get much higher" to "Couldn't get much better." But he just sang the original line anyway. The song was initially written by Robbie Krieger, who wanted to write a song about one of the 4 elements. Great minds think alike. But the song was definitely a group effort, Ray contributing the song's famous intro.
Out of the, the better angels of my unconscious mind came.
And it paid off because Light My Fire shot to #1 and became their most famous song. Interesting enough, this was one of the first single songs I ever bought on iTunes, and I loved the song so much I bought the whole album on CD. As iconic as Jim's vocal is, it's the jam that I get most excited over. A 2-chord vamp, A minor and B minor. Again, Ray and Robbie's jazz-style solos aren't that show-offy, but they're very musical, and John's drum fills really change the dynamics up. I still love listening to it, still love playing it. We'll briefly touch on their second album, Strange Days, for a minute. Love Me 2 Times, also written by Robbie with a Howlin' Wolf-style guitar riff, more inspired by the band Blues Project. This one really shows off their love of the blues, though when it comes time for Ray's harpsichord solo, it sounds more like something Bach would write, which really does give the song a stranger vibe. Jim's really in his element here. I love the way he builds the vocal to that screaming climax. And I mean the climax of the song, not the... never mind. I mean, that's obviously what the song's about. It's very seductive. But the line, "I'm gone away," maybe suggests that the song is about a soldier wanting to make love to his girlfriend before being sent to Vietnam. And if we're gonna talk about Vietnam, we're gonna have to go back to the first album and spin really one of the best songs of the 60s. The End. Jim Morrison's masterpiece. You thought Light My Fire was long? The End clocks out to almost 12 minutes. It's practically impossible for me not to imagine the opening to Apocalypse Now when I first heard this song. One of the best uses of rock music in a movie, perfectly capturing the themes of death and insanity. Jim was obsessed with the concept of death.
I said, Jim, why is it always death? Why do you always have to do that?
I actually went through these lyrics one by one to get a sense of what they're about, but as Jim himself once said, it could be about almost anything. The song really evolved out of their lawn sets on the Sunset Strip where they would stretch it out, Jim incorporating his many books of poetry.
The music would settle into a kind of hypnotic river of sound, which would leave me free to kind of make up anything that came into my head at the time.
Themes of not just death, but primal lust, lost love, escaping the corporate establishment. I also felt like The West is the best, get here and we'll do the rest was written as a little crowd pleaser for the LA audiences. The most famous line, which I alluded to earlier, is about the killer who walks on down the hall, tells his father he wants to kill him, and tells his mother he wants to... yeah. Well, this is a retelling of the Greek play Oedipus Rex, who killed his father and married his mother, maybe also alluding to Freud's famous Oedipus complex. Again, I never realized that Jim's repetition of the line fuck was edited out of the original record. The band also really deserves credit for following Jim's intensity, especially John, whose fills sound like bombs going off. The song takes you on such a journey, I almost feel like nothing can follow it. I mean, it is called The End after all. Which is why I was kinda torn about placing this only at the end of side 1. But looking at this 4-song side, this almost perfectly captures what the Doors were all about. It might be one of my favorite sides I've compiled, but we've got more Doors to go through on side 2. People Are Strange from Strange Days is a collaboration between both Jim and Robbie. A very gloomy tune, but such a catchy chorus with great alliteration and rhyme. I always picture that circus image on the song, maybe aided by Ray's tack piano. Jim was in a deep depression before taking a walk with Robbie to see the sunset when he had an epiphany, people are strange when you're a stranger. I think anyone who's ever felt some sense of isolation or not being able to fit into the norms of society can really identify with this track, and it's a pretty unique glimpse into Jim's psyche. Not to touch the earth from Waiting for the Sun.
It's the departure point.
This song has become legendary among Doors fans. It was originally part of a longer piece called Celebration of the Lizard, inspired by the Golden Bough.
A celebration of existence, the coming of spring or the sun rising.
But they gave up on the idea and elected to include just Not to Touch the Earth. The entire song would eventually see the light of day on their live album. It's an interesting listen. It feels very Stravinsky-like with this atonal music set against the primal backdrop of the lyrics. The line, "Dead President's Corpse on the Driver's Car," is obviously about JFK. The lyrics really have this anti-authoritarian angst and a plea to run into the wild breeze. And despite the experimental nature of the music, it just rocks so hard. And then comes the famous line, "I am the Lizard King. I can do anything." I almost feel like this is his I am the Walrus moment. Maybe this song, this piece, isn't meant to have a specific structure. It's part of what makes it such a staple of psychedelic rock. Now, The Soft Parade is widely regarded as their worst album, and yeah, I agree with them, so let's move on to 1970's Morrison Hotel. There was a lot going on at this time. There was the looming court case of a concert in Miami where Jim allegedly exposed himself, which was really detrimental to their public image. So I think the idea here was to return to a more grounded blues rock sound. And they do quite well with this on their first track, Roadhouse Blues, a shuffle jam with Lonnie Mack on bass and John Sebastian on harmonica. It definitely has that barroom blues vibe, and I've certainly heard terrible versions of it covered at bars across the country. This might seem a bit simplistic after the more experimental tunes, but you can tell they're having a lot of fun with this one. Robbie plays a really cool solo, hated by Jim yelling, "Do it, Robbie!" And Ray's piano fills are a nice addition. Later in the album, we hear the funky guitar opening to Peace Frog, improvised by Robbie in the studio with Jim singing She Came over and over again. A lot of great musical breaks here, along with one of Robbie's best solos ending with a cool guitar-mini lick. There's some interesting lyrical allusions here, one about blood in the streets in the town of New Haven, referring to a New Haven gig where Jim was famously maced by the police. The break after the solo features Jim's spoken word verse. Indians scattered on Dawn's highway bleeding. This refers to a real-life incident Jim witnessed as a child, which had a significant impact on him. Now on the album, Peace Frog goes right into Blue Sunday, which I was afraid would interrupt the flow of this playlist. But I find it does lead nicely into The Changeling, the first track off their final album, LA Woman. This is a very funky James Brown style track with Ray playing some fantastic B3 licks. Robbie also gets a chance to stretch out on his wah and fuzz pedals, all while John drives this soulful jam. I love the double time beat as the song fades out. You will notice that Jim's voice sounds noticeably different. I think he was going more for that Muddy Waters smoky vocal sound, though this could also be attributed to his heavy drinking. He still does a fine job fronting the band on this track, and lyrically, it sounds like he's alluding to his ever-changing lifestyle. Top of the world one day, bottom of the world the next, traveling on the road. Or maybe he's just one of those changelings from Star Trek Deep Space Nine. We'll close side 2 with the last song they ever recorded with Jim Morrison, Riders on the Storm, indeed his swan song. This was the first Doors song I ever heard. While I was just learning to play guitar, I was most intrigued by Ray's rain-like Fender Rhodes.
And here's the rain part.
That's Jerry Scheff doubling the song's bass line, which drives the tune, affected by Robbie's tremolo guitar and the ambience of rain and thunder sound effects. If you listen closely, you can hear Jim doubling his vocal with a whisper, very ghost-like and oddly prophetic. I think lyrically this is some of Jim's simpler poetry, still keeping in that blues vibe, but it's quite effective. To be honest, I don't find this jam to be as dynamic as Light My Fire, and I almost relegated it to the bonus tracks. But more than just the performance, I think this somber tone is the perfect bookend to the Doors' career and shows you, for all its ups and downs, the journey they took their listeners on. Anyway, that's the main playlist. Let's talk bonus tracks. The first one I want to highlight is another epic called When the Music's Over. Since I already had 3 long tunes on this list, I had to save this one for the bonus tracks. It originally appeared on Strange Days and evolved out of their lengthy sets at the Whiskey A Go-Go. Since the song really is about live music, I thought it best to include their legendary Hollywood Bowl rendition from 1968, where they get to stretch out a little more. Ray in particular has a long organ intro inspired by Herbie Hancock. The connection with the audience is also part of the charm. My absolute favorite part of this version is when Jim has the audience get really quiet. The tension builds with everyone wondering what he's going to do next. And then this happens. That's just a magic moment. We'll go back to the first album. There's so many songs to choose from. Soul Kitchen, the covers of Whiskey Bar and Backdoor Man. But to keep another original tune in here, I'm going with 20th Century Fox. Yeah, referring to a girl as a fox was kind of its own trend back in the 60s. Robbie is the real star of the show here with that bluesy opening and a solid solo between verses. The title track to Strange Days is notable for being one of the first popular rock records to use a Moog synthesizer. It was used more as a filter in Jim's voice, affected with some delay to make it sound, well, strange. It was upon hearing an advanced copy of Sgt. Pepper that the band decided to go more experimental, which might be why this organ-driven circus number sounds so quintessentially 60s. Hello I Love You was a #1 hit for the band, though seen as something of a sellout from hardcore fans. They originally recorded it for their 1965 demo, based heavily off the Kinks' All Day and All Night. So much so, they were threatened legal action for copyright infringement, though Ray Davies backed off on that. Because Celebration of the Lizard didn't make the cut, they added this pop number to fill time on Waiting for the Sun. While it is poppy, the execution is what makes it cool. Jim's got some swagger to his vocal delivery, Robbie's fuzz guitar adds some character. I think it's definitely worth mentioning. Alright, we'll give some love to Soft Parade. I almost added the Otis Redding tribute Runnin' Blue mixed with that strange Bob Dylan vocal Robbie sings. But in the end, I decided to go with Touch Me. Another hit for them, though this is the one that feels more like a sellout song to me. It just doesn't feel like Jim's that into the song, despite it sounding like a Frank Sinatra crooner, which he was really into. Still, that opening organ riff is really what ignites the fire, and it's still well written by Robbie. And honestly, Jack Black does the best cover of this in School of Rock. We'll finish off with another number from Waiting for the Sun, 5 to 1. It's hard not to hear this as a prophetic tune with Jim singing, "No one here gets out alive." It's more disheartening to know Jim was drunk off his ass when they recorded it, and that it's associated with his infamous outbursts from the Miami show he was arrested for. But even through all that, his darker take on the counterculture movement is quite relevant. Also, huge credit to Robbie for some great guitar licks all around. This heavy number is a cool way to end the album and this playlist. Spotify playlist is in the description below, and as always, what are your favorite Doors songs? What artist or band do you want me to cover next? Comment below, let me know, and I'll see you all next time.